my PowerPoint presentation, but obviously I left it on Saturday to the Moscow police, which I met. So I'm very sorry, but you would only have to listen to myself, not also to see the PowerPoint. Some excerpts from the material I prepared. So, as you could read, I come from the Department of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology in Ljubljana, and I would like to say that not just to introduce myself, but because I'm part of one research group which is now dealing for the last 2 years with the theme of holidays and their role, state holidays, religious holidays, various holidays, and their role in constructing a Slovenian nation, let's say it so. So their active role of constructing various groups of people, various communities. And as a part of this research, I mostly researched the historical period, I would say, after the Second World War, and how the holidays were related to the productivity in the era of state socialism, let's say it so. But then I also found out that the discourse, the recent discourse of this year and the last year is once again connected, or became once again connected with this bond between holidays and how they relate to people being productive or not. And it is in the context of Slovenian saving measures, as it is said, because Slovenia is facing now, as you probably know, the recession already since 2008. And the holidays were also one of the targets that the government decided to reduce, to take part in their financial saving measures. So, to begin with the story, as a part of economic and financial saving measures in Slovenia, one of non-working holiday was eliminated in 2012. But this act has some acts by which it was followed, as it was said by the media, in good examples of saving money made by Slovenian government already in 2009. Then the economic crisis of a country was at its start, and the Slovenian government decided to reduce costs for official celebrations of state holidays. As it was explained, holidays with not only national but also regional importance, for example, a holiday memorializing the integration of the most eastern Slovenian region, Prekmurje, into its motherland, are since then celebrated with a special state-sponsored event only every 5 years. But since this contributed too little to the state's budget, the right-wing government ruling the country in 2012 decided also not to organize celebrations of 2 other national holidays. And in last year, in 2012, a whole budget for the remaining state holidays, which were supposed to be celebrated by special national events, was also reduced to its half. But the saving measures which gained most of the public responses was the proposition of erasing 2 non-working state holidays. It was the 2nd of January, still celebrating transition to the new year, and the 2nd of May as a part of Labor Day. So in my presentation, I will try to, as a case study, acquaint you with the analysis of these public debates, and the presentation is based on the overview of various Slovenian, mostly media, internet commentaries and forums, mostly, as I said, from Slovenia, but I also tried to make some comparisons with the same material from some other former Yugoslavian republics. For example, in Croatia, in 2012, similar saving measures were proposed, but they were not realized. However, they caused the same debates, let's say. Approaching towards the end of the presentation, I'll also try to interpret the analysis and answer the question why the title of my contribution is referring to the holidays in the era of leisure instead of, for example, to the holidays in the era of work. So to begin with the story, most public responses, which in Slovenia regarded abolishing 2 holidays, could be divided in at least 2 groups. Some people were supporting the elimination of 2 state holidays as they were, at least according to internet forums and debates, at the same time quite often also opposing the former socialist socio-political system Slovenia was facing until 1991. Generalizing their ideas, both holidays, the 2nd of May as well as the 2nd of January, could be abandoned since they became holidays during socialist times and today represent only its leftovers. The historical background confirms this perception, since similarly as in other socialist countries, also in Tito's Yugoslavia, Slovenia was then a part of, holidays which officially lasted for more than just one day were known. Labor Day and the Day of the Republic were celebrated on 2 consecutive non-working days already since 1949, while New Year transformed into a 2-day celebration in 1955. In the following years, similar practice spread also to some other holidays, at least 3, and since I don't have, let's say, too much time, I won't name all of them. And the practice, which was also known since the 70s of the previous century, a working day which fell between a non-working holiday and a weekend could also be worked off in advance. But if we now return to the present commentaries regarding the erasure of 2 contemporary Slovenian holidays, it appeared as crucial how individuals perceived life under socialism in general. If a part of Slovenian public was supporting the erasure of those 2 socialist holidays, mostly because they considered socialism a totalitarian and bad social system, the other part of the public questioned why exactly acquisitions of the socialist system should be abandoned and why some others, for example religious holidays, shouldn't be erased instead. So the 2nd largest Slovenian political party, then constituting a political opposition, for example, proposed the religious holiday of the 15th of August, the Assumption Day, should be abandoned, while individuals similarly proposed the abolition of an Easter Monday or of any other holiday which gained its non-working status only after Slovenia's independence. I will return to that a little bit later, but I would just like to say that all those days were named as holidays. Nevertheless, in law they are in fact not defined as holidays, but only as non-working days. I will come to this systemic differentiation, as I said, a bit later. So this political and ideological dichotomy was recognized and supported also by media, by journalists, who therefore published articles on, as they call them, balanced and righteous elimination of 2 state and at the same time 2 religious holidays in Portugal, as well as on eliminating 1 state and 1 religious holiday in Slovakia. But not only antagonism towards former Slovenian socio-political system echoed from the commentaries and internet forums I analyzed. On one hand, non-working holidays were also presented as an obstacle of productivity, while on the other, they were perceived as its motivators. When, for example, one of the major Slovenian newspapers, called Delo, if I translated its work, made a short survey in April 2012 questioning people how they perceive this relation, most of the respondents declared erasing 2 state holidays wouldn't increase productivity, since, as one of the commentaries was, for example, suggesting, it would make people hate their jobs even more. If there were quite a few citizens supporting the abolition of 2 non-working holidays because of their socialist provenience, there were only some who dared to publicly admit their agreement with this part of the proposed saving measures, as it was said, because of the supposedly significant financial effects. They claimed erasing holidays could strengthen, as it was written often, strengthen economical productivity of a state and help society to economically evolve. And this was also the perception, for example, the president of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Slovenia was spreading when he was, for example, explaining, and I quote now, 1% of taxes and contributions and the company would dig itself out of the crisis. To explain that, it means this 1% of money a company wouldn't have to pay for people when they were really not working at holidays. But the leader of one of the biggest trade unions in Slovenia, of the Association of Free Unions of Slovenia, opposed to such perception, and he stated, I quote again, These employers who demand abolishing holidays consider workers as a pure cost. Too many people already work more than 10 hours a day since they fear they'll otherwise lose their jobs. By abolishing the 2nd of May, salaries won't rise, but the profits will. End of quote. The controversy, of course, derives from the contrasting professional roles the two last mentioned individuals, for example, have, but it also reflects an existing Slovenian systemic differentiation, which I mentioned earlier, between, on one hand, non-working state holidays which are regular working days. I already mentioned a holiday celebrating the reunification of Prekmurje with Slovenia. And also a third category, non-working days, such as, for example, Easter Monday, Christmas, the Assumption Day, and the Reformation Day. This systemic separation is linked also with a law regulating various aspects of employment and obliging the employers to pay his employees for not working at non-working holidays and other non-working days which are scheduled in the working calendar. However, if an employee works at non-working days, he or she should also be paid some additions. To put this from another perspective, only non-working state holidays and some non-working days defined in Slovenia by special law are paid and contribute to one's salary or to the costs an employer has with its employees. But as it seems, the proposition of erasing holidays as a way of saving some budget generalized the perception of holidays as always being work-free days, which contribute to the costs of the employers. Holidays, which are regular working days, were not mentioned neither by the government, state administration, employers, trade unions, nor by employees. Is it as if nobody of them would even consider those days as holidays, since they could only be commemorated on a state level and, most importantly, have only little to do with people's festivity, enabled also because a day is free of work? If concurrently some non-working days are perceived as holidays, is this revealing an existing discrepancy between legal definitions and folks' perceptions of work and, on the other hand, spare or holiday time? In any case, only a few commentators mentioned these systemic regulations and distinctions, and that such distinctions should perhaps, firstly, when thinking about saving, be redefined. Some commentators suggest that only those people working at otherwise non-working days should be paid, while many warned that systemic regulations, however formulated they are one thing, while living practice is something often quite different. As one commentary was suggesting, and again I quote, "If a real state of affairs would be considered, it would be noticed that where there are no commercial orders, there is no work, while where orders are, workers, willingly or not, already work also at holidays." Besides that, as it was emphasized, there already exist many professions, such as nurses, policemen, firefighters, doctors, soldiers, etc., which operate nevertheless if there is a holiday or not. So, if one already mentioned opposition existed between employers or owners of the companies and their employees, another antagonism could also be detected. It evolved among various employees, mostly between employed in the real business sector and, on the other hand, employed in the supposedly ineffective public service. Quite a few commentators judged public sector of being inefficient and lazy, and if I now make some comparison with the discussions on the topic in other regions of former Yugoslavia, their authors mostly perceived this, as it was said, characteristics of a public sector as another socialist legacy. They were using expressions such as the socialist mentality, the socialist cult of not working, or the socialist cult of work but not of things being done, which are supposedly known and shared by all former Yugoslavian or even socialist countries, while some commentators, on the contrary, recognize them as pure national, for example, Slovenian or Croatian, Serbian, etc. inventions. Negotiations about the whole package of Slovenian saving measures, including the erasure of 2 non-working holidays, culminated in the beginning of May 2012, when, for example, the Association of Free Unions of Slovenia in front of its building in the center of Ljubljana on the 2nd of May unfolded a special banner saying "Long live the 2nd of May," and a special celebration of abolishing the 2nd of May was also held at Metelkovo Mesto. This is one of the Ljubljana's center of alternative urban culture, where one of the pubs invited people to celebrate, I quote now, "celebrate the memory of the Labor Day and witness the 2nd of May still being work-free," end of quote. But moving to the situation after such saving measures were accepted in the mid of May, it is interesting there were almost no responses to the abolition of the 2nd of January. If we ask why this was so, I think a semi-realization of a holiday change produced a lose-lose climate. A government withdrew its more controversial proposal of erasing the 2nd of May, which is still associated with at least symbolical value of work, while trade unions sacrificed the 2nd of January for the supposedly common good. The government also explained that such a solution of abolishing the 2nd of January as a non-working holiday will not only enlarge the amount of working days and contribute to the supposed financial benefits, but it would also contribute to a higher comparability of Slovenia with the rest of the Christian Europe. I quote again, "In most of comparable European countries, it is not common to celebrate New Year for 2 days. In most of compared countries, most of the holidays are of a religious character, while besides celebrating New Year and Labor Day, state holidays are usually tied to the statehood of a country." A new holiday regulative was thus also supposed to make Slovenia more European and less marked with its socialist past. Perhaps perception of Slovenia has changed due to this new holiday regulative, but the accepted saving measures, including the erasure of one non-working holiday in more than a year, haven't reached their supposed economical goals. As it was estimated by the economists, I quote, "notable changes due to an abolished holiday haven't occurred," end of quote, while the Chamber of Tourism and Catering hasn't yet evaluated possible negative consequences of this measure. Nevertheless, since the economic situation of the country hasn't improved, in 2013, this year, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Slovenia once again suggested another non-working holiday or 2 should be eliminated, which triggered similar but much fewer responses as they appeared a year ago. If at this point I stop summarizing the material gathered, it was already mentioned not only Slovenian discourses on elimination of holidays as an economical saving measure were subjected to various perceptions of Europeanness. When various and variously gathered statistical data was, for example, presented all over ex-Yugoslavia, it was always emphasized a number of holidays and non-working days in a selected country doesn't deviate from what it was presented as the European average. And interestingly, at the same time, when Slovenian media were announcing Slovenia doesn't depart from this non-working holiday average, most of the Croatian, Bosnian and Serbian reporters were, when comparing Slovenian number of non-working holidays with the numbers in other countries of the European Union, labeling Slovenia as a holder of a record. Besides the quantity of holidays, their one-day or prolonged celebration was also recognized as more or less European. Thus, nevertheless, if a country formerly a part of Yugoslavia was recognized even as short in number of non-working holidays, the way of their 2-day or even more extended celebration was usually perceived as a non-European socialist relic. Such extension of a non-working period by connecting non-working holidays with individuals' leave into a shorter vacation was recognized as the most problematic and considered as either national or more commonly invention of a joint Yugoslavian socialism, which supposedly still bonds each and every person of one's common territory with the already mentioned mentality of non-working. And this mentality, as it was explained by some Serbian sociologists who dealt with, as they name it, the Serbian phenomenon of aggregating holidays, is supposedly already perceived as tradition by people. It would be hard for people, as it was said, to give up these leisurely habits. Abolishing, this is a quote, abolishing a tradition of extended celebration would probably be considered as a withdrawal of something people have a right to. End of quote. Such reactions and commentaries are interestingly quite conflicting with the data provided by some quantitative and qualitative research. Here, for example, I refer to Jonathan Gershwini's study entitled Changing Times, Work and Leisure in Post-Industrial Society. And he was establishing that in the former socialist Eastern European bloc, people, whether being paid or not, work much more than in other parts of Europe. It thus seems this mentality of non-working is something at least a part of a population in former Yugoslav republics attributes to itself. When nevertheless this mentality has, as it was sometimes emphasized, nothing to do with the workers' reality, and nevertheless uniting non-working days into double holidays. This is an expression, for example, Sebastian de Grazia uses in his work already in the 60s of the previous century, or extended weekends is known also elsewhere. So the tradition of socialist mentality of non-working, as any other tradition, in my opinion, thus generalizes and homogenizes communities, as well as it also draws their geographical boundaries. However, interesting it is, not only in the case of Slovenia, that those boundaries are mostly drawn by self-criticism and an internalized perception of itself as the European other. If reaching towards the end, I also tried to see the elimination of holidays as a saving and consequently economical measure, the anticipation is saving would appear by not paying people for their not working. What such perception focuses upon is the quantity of time, while questions how people work, or even further, what they conceptualize as work, are left aside. In such a way, is work thus still considered merely as an activity performed at a workplace, as a job, and not, for example, in its broader sense? Here I quote Sandra Wallman's definition in a book, Social Anthropology. So, definition of work as a usage of energy for gaining some goals and consequently sacrificing some individual spare time and comfort. In that sense, the activities supporting spare, even holiday time, for example, tourist activities, fit into such conceptualizations of work. It seems not. Is this indicating early industrialists' point of view according to which holidays are nothing but spending time and workers' spare time is nothing but unnecessary and high cost? Taking into account the historical perspective, which was here already mentioned for some times, we can see that, of course, the number of holidays was reducing already since the Antiquity and Middle Ages, while Protestants' movement and the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century were the most importantly contributing to the described industrial perception. And we can also compare this with those more recent ideas I was primarily focusing upon. Some parallels can also be drawn with the centrally planned socialist notions of competitions, which was in the first 10 years of Tito's Yugoslavia perceived as a new way of work. However, at least one key difference between the socialist then and the post-socialist now can, in my opinion, be observed. In the early 50s of the previous century, holidays were considered as milestones of evaluating working competition and productivity, while today they are no longer seen as such. In any case, as at least some researchers argue for already decades, and they were already mentioned today, resting and recreating also has an economical meaning and consequences. Gershwini, I was also referring already to, was establishing that work-free as well as paid work time are a part of economy, since it is mostly spare time that today contributes to the consumption and thus to the amount of work and new workplaces. Or seen from another perspective, when limiting spare time or making one's work schedule more restricted, precisely defining when during the day, week or year an individual could spend his or her spare time, an individual consumes less, as he says. This was also emphasized by some Croatian commentaries on the supposed elimination of 3 Croatian non-working holidays. The opinion which prevailed there was suggesting productivity is not merely about how many working hours there are, but also about holidays which not only contribute to people's rest and motivation, but for example to a tourist consumption as well. As Gershwini further observed, most of the European, as well as to some extent also North American countries, have in the last decades increased the number of the paid non-working holidays. This has happened because of the, as he says, supposed economical expediency, while the process was also parallel to rising individuals' evaluation of time as a valuable and scarce resource. Most of the people, with the exception of the low-educated, on a daily basis thus work more, while yearly period of the paid work time in the average got shorter since the number of work-free days increased. Nevertheless, this average still doesn't apply for the former socialist Eastern European countries. And reaching towards the end of the presentation, if I now try to connect all that it was said with the question why I observed the elimination of holidays in the time of leisure, and not instead, for example, in the time when, at least according to some research, people in post-socialist countries, including Slovenia, work more, it is simply because perspectives of the people were in the foreground of the presentation. Nevertheless, if at least some individuals, realizing their reality, as it was said, perceive they're working a lot more than in the socialist past, for example, it seems as if in general this perception and experience still doesn't override their internalized otherness. And nevertheless, if governments and the ruling elites also in Slovenia perhaps want to follow Gershwini's neoliberal view about the role spare time has in the economical sense, it seems this direction opposes too strongly also to their internalized perception of the socialist mentality and otherness. Or is it perhaps just an excuse? Thank you.